it's fair to say my March TBR was an ambitious one. If you have been following my channel, you'll know I was hoping to complete the Goodreads 2026 Winter Challenge and read a book for every prompt in this challenge. As a result, I set myself quite a long list of books to read in March in the hopes of both achieving this, but also catching up and keeping on top of my other reading obligations. Now, sadly, I didn't quite get to the end of that challenge. Thankfully, I did keep on top of my obligations, which was obviously the more important thing, and the challenge ultimately ended up slipping because I chose to prioritise those books where I'd already agreed to commit to providing a review. But nevertheless, I'm not disappointed that I didn't get through all the books on my list. I knew it was a push, but I thrive on having a bit of a challenge and giving myself that kind of lofty target to get to. So it is what it is. I have made a very good go at it, and you know what? It's kind of inspired me to have a go at it properly, to maybe try again for another challenge later this year. Alas, I'm getting ahead of myself here. We're here to talk about my reading progress for March and the books I read rather than look ahead to future reading challenges. So let's shelve that one for now. I'll come back to that on a later video. But for now, let's recap what I read in March. First on the reading list was a carryover from February, and it is my first kind of book in my Throne of Glass read-along. Yes, I was late to finishing my own read-along, and unfortunately that has continued, but nevertheless. I really enjoyed picking up this first instalment of Sarah J. Maas's fantasy series. I was recommended this one over some of her other series because it has a higher kind of focus on the fantasy elements rather than being too romance heavy. And I'm pleased to say I absolutely agree with that assessment. So thank you to my sister for pointing me in that direction over the likes of ACOTAR and other maybe higher profile books that she's written, just because it definitely appeals to my reading taste a little bit better. Now, I did carry the end of this book forward into March, but it didn't take me too long to complete this one. I was getting to a point where the plot of the story was getting really interesting, and I was definitely invested in figuring out what happened. That was definitely a very good start to March, and from there I went on to pick up both Goodreads 2026 Winter Challenge picks and then later on some reading obligations. The first of the Goodreads 2026 Winter Challenge books I picked up was because I had a deadline for this one. I borrowed a copy of Wild Dark Shore digitally from my library, and the deadline for this book kind of snuck up on me a little bit. I got a bit trigger happy at the beginning of the month and I downloaded, this book? I also downloaded a copy of A Study in Scarlet Women, which I didn't get to. And I also borrowed a physical copy of a book called Looking at Women, Looking at War, which I also didn't get to, but I've managed to extend that loan. So I basically took all of these out at the beginning of the month, and then they came up due, and I was like, what do I do? So I couldn't extend Wild Dark Shore because somebody had put a hold on it, whereas I could extend A Study in Scarlet Women, and the other book had until the 30th of March anyway. So, needless to say, I got to reading pretty rapidly. And I must confess, I was sat up till about 2 a.m. one night, the day before this was due, just to get the book finished. But to be perfectly honest, it wasn't really effort in it at all. I really enjoyed this kind of mystery thriller. It's very dark, atmospheric, but also quite descriptive and beautiful in its reverence towards nature and the power of it, but also in the beauty of animals and their kind of life cycles and all that sort of thing. So it was quite different from what I expected, but to be honest, I didn't know a whole lot going into this book, so it was a win-win. Very happy that I read this book, and it qualified for 2 achievements that I needed to get. Anyway, I'll link you to the video I recorded when I kind of outlined the books I wanted to read for each of these prompts so you know what they qualified for properly, rather than me trying to half remember. Next on the list, I picked up 1984 by George Orwell. Now, this doesn't actually in itself qualify for the Goodreads reading challenge. What I wanted to do was refresh myself on the classic kind of dystopian fiction before I delved into a retelling of 1984 that did qualify for the retellings prompt. So unfortunately, I didn't get to that retelling either, but that is going to be on my carried forward list, so I will be picking this up in April. 1984, I made a healthy start. I got to around a third of the way through the book before I had to prioritise some other kind of more urgent reads for review obligations. So I've got to around 120 pages into this book. Really enjoyed it, quite effortless to read. And I have to say, I'm also quite enjoying my cloth-bound classic edition of this book. I'd like to say I'm not too much of a reading snob, but maybe that's not true. But anyway, I'm really enjoying it. It's not too heavy for a hardback, so that's also a win. And I'm really looking forward to continuing this one. So this is an active carry forward into early April, and I will include this book when I talk about my April TBR. Sorry, the cat's playing. The next book on the list was an audiobook I listened to throughout most of March, chipping away at the book pretty slowly. I really enjoyed picking up this book because it's been a while since I have read the dark academia genre. Now, it is one I enjoy, and I probably last visited it when I read a book called If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. Whilst I did expedite picking up this book for the Goodreads Winter Challenge, I did actually add this to my TBR back in January anyway, so it felt like a pretty natural pick for this challenge. It was a book I already wanted to pick up. It obviously qualified. This one qualified for the Black Heritage prompt, so it was nice to go and visit kind of some very, I suppose, tricky themes like racism and classism from an ethnic perspective. So I suppose we know about these things kind of happening, but rarely do we really see it playing out in front of us and also affecting us in a way. Obviously, we're not the protagonist, but this reads in a way that we are very, very much able to relate to the protagonist. So I personally really enjoyed how this worked. There is also a mystery aspect to this novel where the character gets the feeling kind of deja vu and feels like she's been here before, and there's something that she isn't quite getting. There are clues being left for her to try and get to the bottom of it, and throughout the book we watch this kind of storyline unravel. So that really worked for me. It was a fun read, but also I was really invested in finding out what was going on. So all in all, this was a great read to pick up for the Goodreads Winter Challenge. After finishing the audiobook of An Arcane Inheritance, I then picked up the Astral Library, and that is actually my current listen as of recording on, were we the 1st of April? 1st of April. I'm actually most of the way through this audiobook. I maybe have a couple of hours or so left, including what I've listened to today. So this is going to be a quick listen. I'm hoping to record this as a completed book in my Sunday summary, which is going to go live on my blog later this week. So I'm hoping this is going to be a quick win. And again, I will touch on this in my April TBR video, but it will very much be pretty much yes, it's carried forward, but I'm hoping to say it's done. Now, I'm really enjoying this book. I wanted to pick this up as it's one of my highly anticipated 2026 releases. So it was a book I wanted to read anyway because it's very reminiscent to me of Matt Haig's The Midnight Library in terms of its style and how it's almost like a book of books kind of thing. But whereas The Midnight Library is kind of using books as portals to other lives, the Astral Library is, you know, it includes books we know and titles and characters and all that sort of thing where we kind of delve into those worlds in a little bit of a different way. But I'm enjoying kind of that overall central arc format where we have this centralized kind of spiritual library almost. So the storylines do differ. So don't think reading one is a carbon copy of the other, because it's absolutely not. They're very different. But if you like that overarching premise idea of the Midnight Library, then the Astral Library is going to be for you as much as it was for me. Again, this book has quite a compelling mystery to it. There is something going on. The library doesn't seem like it's particularly safe, and that is its job. It's to be a safe haven for people who are desperate and turn to books. So I'm not going to spoil anything more for you in this video, but I just want to record here. Yes, I have been listening to it throughout the month of March. I'm really enjoying it, and I only have a couple of hours left. So fingers crossed I'll be able to tell you more on this one in the near future. We're getting towards the end of March now, and the books I picked up for my reading obligations. The first of those is a book called Rose Red by Sarah Biggerstaff, and I had a commitment to post a review of this book on social media on the 28th of March. So as I'm sure you can, understand, I had to put aside the likes of 1984 and my Goodreads challenge books in order to work my way through these arcs so that I could provide reviews on the specified days. Rose Red is a fantasy kind of fairy tale like retelling, so that was a fun book to take a look at, a kind of subgenre I have enjoyed not too long ago now, but maybe isn't something I would say I read a whole lot of. Now, Rose Red is inspired by kind of Snow White in terms of its setting, but we have a lot kind of more going on than just this retelling. We have very kind of difficult relationships between characters, especially kind of authority figures. But we also have the likes of witchcraft involved, so that really appealed to me as well. The protagonist, Rose, is a budding witch, and a lot of the book is about her learning how to adopt her magic in a way that feels both authentic to her, and maybe deviates from how sort of previous generations in her family have adopted it. This book also had a really interesting mystery, so again, I was pretty hooked. I've shared my kind of review on this book already in a reel, and that was on Instagram. I also posted this as a short on YouTube, so what I'll do is I'll give you a little link up here if you want to go and check that one out. If that's kind of your thing, then great. If it's not, I would still give it a look anyway. It was quite an interesting read for me. That's something I've dabbled in before with the Cottagecore Fantasy Book Club historically. It's something I've experimented with a little bit more. Now, I wouldn't say this is Cottagecore purely because there are some kind of like violence. Some of it can be a little bit gory, so I wouldn't pigeonhole it quite there, but it's definitely in that vibe, I suppose. So if that's your sort of thing and you're willing to branch out a little bit, then go for it. That is a new release, so I hope you are interested and want to go and give that a look. Finally, we have my last reading obligation, for which I am still reading said book as of recording, and I am reviewing the book tomorrow. I'm also juggling some work deadlines, so I'm a busy gal. I'm actually cooking tea at the moment, so I am literally just juggling, so bear with me here. I am reading, and I'm going to be reviewing tomorrow, a book called Storm of Mercia by M.J. Porter. Now, if you have been following my written blog for any length of time, maybe you haven't, please go check it out. I have been writing about these books and this series for probably a couple of years, as and when these have come out. Now, Storm of Mercia is actually book 9 in the series, so if you hear that and think, oh, well, that's too long, I can't be bothered catching up, please don't write it off. It is a fantastic historical fiction series, and this one in particular has one of my favourite kind of protagonist main characters in it going in its kind of genre so far. So please at least go and give the first book a go. If a big long series isn't for you, that's fine. I think you could perfectly read the first one kind of standalone and it wouldn't do too much harm. That book is called Son of Mercia, by MJ Porter. But anyway, I have been following this series. I've been reviewing pretty much every book as and when it came out. So you can see the kind of commitment I have here. And also kind of level of enjoyment. Why would I stick with this series so hard if it wasn't something that I wasn't enjoying? Now, the main character, Isel, has progressed quite a lot since that first book. When we pick up the first book of this series, he is very much kind of not the kind of character you would expect. He doesn't fit into the kind of traditional designated role we see in these types of fictions. In fact, he's quite the opposite. He tries to stay the opposite. But naturally, events kind of steer him maybe in a different direction to that he planned. However, he does manage to stick to his roots, and that comes through throughout the books. So we see a lot of growth in terms of, this personal conflict between what he wants to do and what he feels obligated to do, and his duties, and generally like his moral compass, basically. So it's a very interesting series for that. In this book so far, we see Isel in the hands of his enemies. Obviously, I'm, again, not going to spoil things too much for you here, but I have managed to read this book quite easily. I'm about halfway, so I have a bit of reading to do tonight. Obviously, by the time you see this, I might have even published that review. It just depends on timing and priorities and all that. But I did start this book right at the end of March. I started it on Sunday, so that would be the 29th. And I'm reviewing this tomorrow on the 2nd of April. So I have some furious reading to do tonight. So again, this will get a mention in my April TBR video, but probably only fleeting, because I have a deadline of tonight to read it. So wish me luck. So those were the books I read throughout the month of March. There are some, obviously, I've started. I have a list of books that I didn't get to. I have 4 books I didn't get to that will very likely feature in my April TBR, because as much as I didn't get to read them for the challenge, I would like to kind of still see those titles through, especially for the likes of my library loan. Like, it doesn't make sense to take it back unread at this point. So I'll be touching on those in the very near future. And yeah, those were the books I read in March. Did you read anything particularly interesting in March that you want to recommend to me? If not, I hope you can take a look at my April TBR coming out in a few days, where I touch on the carryovers I have somewhat discussed today. I also have my fixed read of A Crown of Midnight. But for the rest of my TBR, I've actually let it be decided by picking books out of a TBR jar. So it was random. I have a bit of an eclectic choice. So I hope you can take a look at that video when it goes live. If you were curious to see all of the books I wanted to pick up for the Goodreads Winter Challenge, I will link that video as well. Otherwise, I hope you've had fun with today's video. Let me know what you've been reading, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.